Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the workshop today. My name is Lisa Helps, and I'm the executive lead for BC Builds at BC Housing. And I would like to welcome everyone here today, and also to begin in a good way, as Leanne noted, by recognizing where I am and asking all of you to recognize where you are today, which no matter where we are in the province, we're on Indigenous land. So I'm here on Lekwungen territory, the home of the Songhees and Esquimalt nations in the city of Victoria. And I'm grateful to the nations for stewarding these beautiful lands, and for taking such good care of them for generations, so that we who are visitors here today have the opportunity to work on a better relationship, on right relationship, and on reconciliation. My friend Mary Rowe, who's the CEO and president of the Canadian Urban Institute, whenever she hosts a webinar, she always asks everyone to just take a moment of reflection and let us know which territories, Indigenous lands you're on in the chat, so that we have really a sense of place. So if you wouldn't mind letting us know which lands you're on today. And thinking as you type those words in, what it means to be visitors and settlers on others' lands. And for the Indigenous people here, thank you for your work with us in housing, which I really see particularly, and I'll talk a little bit about this in the presentation. Housing and home building is really an opportunity for reconciliation and for right relationship. So I just wanted us to begin in a good way, no matter where we are. When we're talking about housing, we're talking about land. And when we're talking about land in this province, we're talking about the lands that are stewarded and loved by and tended to by Indigenous people. So I want to hold my hands up and say thank you, in particular, to be rooted here on Lekwungen territory, and respect everyone else's rooting in where they are coming from today. And with that, a very warm welcome to all of you. We've got a great crowd here. We're really excited about the program that we've put together, and the Centre for Dialogue has done an amazing job, and the Renewable Cities team has done an amazing job. And I think and we're all really in for a great opportunity to learn and share together today. So with that, Leanne, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks for grounding our conversation to start us off. My name's Leanne Sawatsky. I am Interim Executive Director at SFU Renewable Cities, and we're a special initiative at the Centre for Dialogue, which is also part of SFU. And we're really happy to be hosting this workshop alongside BC Builds, which is part of BC Housing, and Vancity Community Foundation. At SFU Renewable Cities, we're really committed and passionate to helping communities to become and be more livable, resilient, and equitable. So we have 3 goals today as we set up this workshop. We were thinking about how we would love to inspire you about what's possible with building housing on your land. We want to inform you about different options and the path ahead, whether that be relating to your goals, whether that be funding considerations or other important considerations as you're thinking through what might be involved. And we also want to connect you with others that are here today, because many of you have really shared and common interests and concerns that you may not realize as you're joining here. And that's something I've heard from Lisa as she's running the BC Builds program, is that oftentimes, even when you're coming from totally different sectors and you're developing housing, that a lot of the concerns and challenges that you're coming across are the same and really similar. And so I want to encourage you today to take note of who's here and really be courageous, reaching out and connecting to others for shared support and learning. We wanted to start this conversation by getting you to think about what is possible for housing that we are building. We know that we're in a housing crisis. Many of us have heard CMHC say that we need 5.8 million homes in Canada to be built by 2030. And so when we think about this context, then we're thinking about how, as we build homes, we want to build homes not just quickly, but to build excellent housing. We need to get housing right. So that means, among other things, that it be affordable, that it be low carbon and resilient to climate change. We know that housing is essential community infrastructure, and that it really has the potential to support livability, affordability, and equity in our community. We're talking about more than just housing units here. Housing can meet a range of needs in our communities. So redeveloping the land that you're stewarding, and why you're here or why you're curious, hopefully, is because we think that this can be one piece of the housing puzzle. And we know that it's a really complex challenge. There's many moving parts, whether that be funding or shifting timelines for approvals, working with rights holders or your membership or different constituents and neighbors and interested groups. There's a lot of different pieces to figuring out and navigating what a redevelopment of your land with housing might look like. And so before I share our agenda for today, I want to frame our conversation in what we at SFU Renewable Cities see as really important and exciting pieces about the potential for housing, for excellent housing, and for what a housing development could possibly be. We have the opportunity to build housing that is resilient to extreme weather. So whether that be blue-green infrastructure that deals with extra water from heavy rainfall, whether that be having trees incorporated on the property to enhance natural shading, or whether it be low embodied carbon that is fast to construct, so prefabricated mass timber, or whether it's an electrified building that has low emissions and high efficiency heat pumps for heating and cooling. We have the opportunity to build housing that supports social connection between residents and within communities. And this can contribute to social resilience and to happiness and well-being. And we also have the opportunity to think about how and where our housing developments are being located. So finding ways to creatively support transportation options so that residents are not necessarily stuck relying only on car to get around, but that they have some options for walking or rolling, biking, or if available, if public transit's available, that they may have access to that as well. And so as we create a vision about what we're going to do with our land, then we know that the potential benefits are huge. And we also want to use this session to help you ground yourself in what the possibilities are, to connect with concrete examples that we're going to share today, and to be getting a sense of what some options are for next steps, and making connections with each other to navigate the path forward.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm thankful to be speaking to you from the unceded ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. My name is Nathaniel Stradoff, and I'm a project manager for the City of Vancouver's Facilities Development Group in the Department of Real Estate, Environment, and Facilities Management. And Carrie's agreed to join me here today from the Vancouver School Board's Vancouver Project Office. And we'll be telling you about this exciting mixed-use project that we're working on in Cole Harbour. The Cole Harbour Phase 2 project is a new facility currently under construction on the Vancouver waterfront that comprises an elementary school for 340 students, a childcare for 65 kids, and 60 units of non-market rental housing. Our site, if you're familiar with Vancouver, is bounded by Broughton Street on the west, Hastings Street on the south, Jervis Street on the east, and the Cole Harbour seawall on the north. It's right on the waterfront. The story that we plan to focus on today is about the partnerships that ultimately finalize the project's viability. But the story of this project goes back further, and so I'll start with some context. During the 1990s, the City of Vancouver received the land for our project as part of an agreement with a developer who built some condominium towers to the northeast of our site. And at that time, the city identified several needs that the site could support in the downtown community. They saw needs for a park, a community center, an elementary school, a childcare, and affordable housing. Cities need a lot of things. And in an increasingly urbanized city center, new projects have often needed to be mixed-use facilities in order to meet those community needs and to optimize the financial viability of the project. So the Cole Harbour Phase 1 project comprised a community center and a park and was completed around the year 2000. The Phase 2 project, for the other components, sat dormant for 20 years while awaiting funding. The housing and childcare are funded largely by community amenity contributions from condominium developments on nearby sites, with some provincial funding for the childcare and later on some federal funding for the housing. The City of Vancouver had partnered early on with Vancouver School Board during the 1990s for the Phase 2 component. And VSB schools are typically funded through the BC Ministry of Education. For this project, the catalyst that allowed the entire project to move forward in about 2019, 2020 was that the VSB had identified an asset on one of their neighboring properties, about 10 blocks from our site, that had unique value for another third party in the community. And the sale of that asset was able to provide funding for the school component. And that other party was BC Hydro. So the way that the City of Vancouver and the VSB and BC Hydro were able to make the project work for all parties was by considering community needs beyond our own project site. Carrie, could you please describe for us the general terms of that VSB agreement with BC Hydro?
Yeah, for sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Carrie Chua from the Vancouver School Districts. So as Nathaniel mentioned, our traditional way of getting funding is through the Ministry of Education and Childcare. But unfortunately, this Coal Harbour site is not on the priority list for the capital plan. So that's why we were looking for other funding. And we're very happy that BC Hydro, they approached us in 2018 that acquiring, they're showing their interest to acquire one of our sites that is below grade to build their substation. And then after some consultation and research on our own, then the board of our school district approved the sale. So that was really a win-win situation because we were looking for funding to fund the school. And then BC Hydro, they were also looking for another site to kind of like basically they need more power because their old substation is aging, so that's why they need a new site to basically supply electricity and power to the area. So it was really a win-win situation for all three parties, City of Vancouver, BC Hydro, and us. And then through the sale of the sub-service parcel, we were able to get some funding to fund Coal Harbour Elementary School and also the future Robert Sanic sites, the replacement school over there. Back to you, Nathaniel.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. So I understand that this new substation in the West End is intended to replace the aging substation that's currently on Burrard Street. It seems like such a great agreement to me for BC Hydro to purchase the subgrade rights that still allows a school and play field to be on the site above the substation. And it was very serendipitous for the project that we're working on together now. And it's got a lot of lessons that I think are useful for people who are interested in doing similar projects. The lessons learned from this experience centered around partnership. So a set of interrelated needs were identified in the community, and the program on the site was designed for synergy among those needs. So the housing will be available at rents that will be affordable to people who might otherwise be priced out of the neighborhood. The school and the childcare will serve the needs of the residents in that affordable housing, as well as the broader community. And the housing residents and the school and childcare populations will become the fuller community that the community center and park were designed to serve. So with those needs identified, a partnership was formed to meet those very needs. Partnership between partners were optimally suited to deliver those facilities. The partners pursued funding for the project through their respective channels. And ultimately, the catalyst that made the project viable from a financial perspective was yet another community need, electricity. And all those community benefits became deliverable on our site and on the other school site because the potential of that neighboring site was brought into the equation. And so I'd say, in conclusion, not every developer will be able to call up BC Hydro and make a deal. So abstracting from that specific circumstance, the suggestions would be to consider community needs on any given project site and also well beyond that project site, and to look for partners or other parties who are optimally suited to deliver those community needs, and consider what those partners or other parties might be able to offer each other that make the complete package work.
Nathaniel, Carrie, did you want to add anything before I pass it off to the room to begin the discussion?
No, I think we're ready for questions.
Oh, great. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for sharing. And Cole Harbour Phase 2 is such a cool story, and all of you would have received the case studies that we did on the nonprofit and public housing developments. We published them earlier this year, and Cole Harbour was one of those case studies. If you're interested in learning the full story of Cole Harbour, I'd highly recommend that read. Are there any questions that are coming up that you need maybe like answered, clarified before we're able to dive in?
Sounds like there's a lot of partners in this. I really appreciate you sharing this. And can you talk about that? Like how there's a working group, I would assume, this is a multi-year project with, complexities and funding complexities. Like what's the backbone look like?
I would love to, I wish I had more context myself, because a lot of the genesis of this project occurred in the 1990s. And all the people who participated in that have since moved on, and they're not really available here for me to ask questions of. So I have a bit of a paper trail from the pre-digital days. But I think that essentially it would have been that people in charge of planning and finance at the City of Vancouver at that time, who have ongoing collaborations with the school board, would have looked at the site and said, what can we deliver? And then I described how funding typically works for each of those components. And if it had been a different type of program, then the funding might have been from a different source. But I think my guess is that identifying those needs was pretty easy, because people are clamoring for them every day. And it was more a matter of how to put the funding in place. And that's why the phase 2 took 20 years.
I'll jump in with a question there if the floor is available. Great discussion, and thanks for bringing this to talk about. I guess my question would be sort of a carry along. I know obviously funding is a challenge everywhere, and resources are being highly competed for, sort of across multiple sectors and everything like that. So I'd just be interested to hear a little bit more about what was the trigger that made this project possible in this location at this point in time, kind of thing. I mean, obviously the BC Hydro piece was mentioned already, but just curious if there's more information specific to that. Thanks so much.
Maybe, Carrie, I think I'll start, and then I'll hand it over to you. I think the funding for the housing and childcare components of this project were more flexible, because the city has had a decades-long program of collecting community amenity contributions for developments in that neighborhood. That funding was more flexible, and it really was the school component that was facing more of a challenge. And so the BC Hydro deal was very fortuitous. Carrie has said that it sounds like it was BC Hydro that approached the school board first, rather than the other way around. Maybe I can throw in one more thing before I ask her to comment on that. The City of Vancouver and the Vancouver School Board have several partnerships throughout the city. Most commonly, what that looks like is it's a childcare paid for by the city on top of a school paid for by the school board through the ministry. And so, because we have this ongoing conversation, and we're pleased with the results of our partnership. So that part of the deal, like the funding for the childcare and the housing, the partnership with the school board, that was all sort of strong from the beginning. This final piece sounds like it was initiated by BC Hydro. Carrie, do you have any more information about how that conversation was initiated?
I think all I know is BC Hydro, they knew that they needed a substation in Vancouver, and there weren't a lot of sites available. And then so they identify, the Roberts Annex school site, it could be a potential. That's why they came to us. But I'm pretty sure they have done a lot of research which location is viable, and then ultimately, down to a couple options, and they approached us. And then one more thing I want to say here is that we have enrollment pressure in the whole downtown Vancouver area, and also in the neighboring catchment. So we knew that like we needed a school always at the site. And then partnering with City of Vancouver, it's also a win-win because there's some costs that we can share together to kind of help out each other too.
Yeah, and I think that's why we're seeing so many mixed use projects these days. So many of our housing projects have another component to them. Schools typically have some other component to them these days too, right? Of densifying urbanism. But it's also worked very well in the city of Vancouver. I feel like, as a resident, it's made the city much richer to have these varied interlocking programs on every block of the city.
So I'm just really curious about having that social housing aspect with an elementary school and with a daycare. I mean, I know that's probably very common in more urban areas that are more dense, but in the smaller community that I work in, it's a kind of a new concept for community members that they do struggle with having say things that have services attached to them. I'm not sure if the social housing that you're talking about does have that attached, but close to daycares or elementary that are serving younger, more vulnerable populations and vulnerable in a different way. So I'm just curious if there was any conversation throughout this project about having those things combined and how that relationship developed to ensure that everyone at the table was comfortable and on board with the project.
Yeah, it seems to me that we're seeing so much mixed use now. The question almost becomes, well, what can't you co-locate? What can't you what can't you put with housing? Because everything else should be on the table. Because if it helps, it helps. Like what you see most commonly, especially in private developments, is you'll see commercial retail. But then, under the City of Vancouver's social housing program, we have co-located childcares, fire halls. I think that and the school, I think, is the first time this is actually happening, though. It's a first for us, and I believe it's a first for you as well, Carrie, right?
Yeah, first time with housing. We have a lot of collaborative project with childcare.
And so I think that complexity is complexity. And so you really need to work on it, not only from a planning perspective, but also an architectural perspective. Building systems as well. This building ended up having to be internally divided into essentially 3 separate buildings, which takes a lot of planning and a lot of careful design. And I think that with good design, what you get is you get powerful synergy that really benefits everyone. And good design is the key.
Yeah, I want to also mention about the point that Nathaniel just mentioned is we try to separate the system as much as we can, like different mechanical system, separate them, and then like entrance, we don't share elevator with housing, staircase and so on, because that makes the operation aspect easier down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And was there any like community engagement that happened throughout this? So like just having like the general community that this would be serving come to the table and discuss what that would look like. And did you have any negative responses at all? I don't know. Sorry.
Yeah, most of the community engagement happened before I joined the city in this current role. I think there would have been some engagement back in the 90s that neither one of us would recall. I think, Carrie, you were part of some engagement shortly before I joined the project. So maybe you can add a couple words about how that all went. When I joined, the project was already in design development. And so what I remember is during the public hearing for the rezoning text amendment we had to do, there was some community opposition. Cole Harbour is a very affluent neighborhood and with a lot of towers. And there were some residents who were concerned that the new building would block some of their water view. And there were some residents who were concerned that having all those school children there might make the neighborhood more chaotic for pickup and drop off and noise and all that stuff. But ultimately, the project received unanimous support from council and also from the DP board. So although there was some community questions, it was clear that the neighborhood really wants this project. These are tremendous benefits the neighborhood's been clamoring for decades, and so it's very rewarding to be able to provide those. Carrie, do you want to add any words about those early public engagements before I showed my face?
Sure. So we did hear quite a bit of opposition, just like what Nathaniel mentioned. It was challenging, but I think the key is like what can we do to really address a lot of housing crisis. School, we're reaching a lot of enrollment pressure and things like that. And then we understand that, we're very happy that the community also gave us feedback about their concerns regarding maybe like traffic jam and things like that. It was an open platform that, everybody can voice out during the public consultation phase. So, but at the end, as Nathaniel mentioned, the City of Vancouver Council, they approved their projects. And also internally within the school district, we also had a lot of internal engagement with the existing school communities. So that's why we inform everyone to make sure that the project is transparent. Nobody gets surprised. So it's part of the important criteria for success of the projects.
Are some other models in this city where the housing for which there's very high demand and potential profit is used as the profit center that allows the other components, the needed amenities, infrastructure, social components to be built, and I guess for each piece of land and each organization, the parameters of what would be a mutually beneficial arrangement to provide housing, when really, if your real goal is to provide a crisis center, but the housing is the thing that allows that crisis center to happen, then I guess people would just be looking to see what type of arrangement would allow a partnership, potentially with a real estate developer who could bring enough to the table, get enough out of it to make it mutually beneficial, and just make the deal work for everyone. And I guess I'm thinking of one thing that comes to mind is this massive Cenac development that's happening in Vancouver at the south end of the Burrard Bridge. It's First Nations land. It's being built by a prominent local developer, I believe, for a fee, and the First Nation retains ownership of the land. And there's some sort of a deal about there'll be rental properties. It's a deal about how the rental income gets divided and how the use of those properties get divided between the First Nation and the developer. And they were able to find an agreement that worked for everyone. And it's going to be providing such a massive increase in the amount of rental housing in Vancouver that it'll be a benefit to the broader city as well. I guess maybe just hear myself talk, maybe there's a deep lesson here in a nation that is so constrained by a massive need for a tremendous amount of housing. Maybe the question is should we be putting housing on everything? Like should every one of these other programs that we're talking about be co-located with a lot of housing? And in the past, even in Vancouver, but definitely through the rest of BC, density was a scary thing for people, and especially building tall worried people. Even in Vancouver today, there are certain neighborhoods where it's okay to build tall, and other neighborhoods where the entire neighborhood will become very anxious if you mention a tower. But we're slowly getting over that in this municipality, and I believe that there are some others around BC as well who are beginning to see the benefits of building dense. I must say, living in a dense city, I find the benefits are tremendous, and I wish that people who haven't experienced that would be less anxious about it. And I guess the other aspect was legislation. Legislation needed to permit that type of density. And I think there's a wave now of new legislation that's trying to do that to varying degrees. But maybe in this climate, it's a good time for people to lobby for more legislation. If you need a legislative change in order to get the density that you need to make your project work, this might be the best time in memory to push for it.
My name is Aubrey McAtee. I'm the executive director with Salisbury Community Society. Here to share a little bit about our project. Salisbury Community Society is the operator for the building called Cohere, which I will speak about. And today I'm really going to center our talk on social design, belonging, and stewardship, as well as a little bit of the history. And I won't go into all the details, so please bring those questions forward if you want to know some more information. I'm also quite new to the organization. I've been in the ED position for about a year, so I was not part of all of the visioning and original work that happened over a decade. I do want to just throw that out there. I'm a learner alongside all of you. I would like to introduce you to Cohere. So Cohere is a mixed income apartment building, and we're located on the former underused parking lot of the Grandview Baptist Church at Victoria and First in East Vancouver. We're on the unceded territories of the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And so how this started is the church had been actively engaged with the Grandview community since the early 90s. They were striving to address the needs of the community as well as the city. And Cohere, it means community here. And so the church's vision was really to think about how could they serve their community and address this critical need for housing. So the building is a 26-unit apartment where residents work hard to become great neighbors. They share their time with each other through community meals, gardening, caring for common spaces, and simply enjoying life together. Our aim is to have a diverse community that offers affordable housing with supports from people within the building that carry a variety of different skills and backgrounds. And so initially, Grandview Church was the landowner of this property, and they transferred ownership to a foundation called the Cohere Foundation. And throughout the development process, the church provided lots of input on the project. And they did that through representation on both the operator board, the Salisbury Community Society, as well as the Cohere board, which is the foundation. So I might go into a little bit more of that towards the end, but we're going to kind of talk more on the design. As an operator, we are a socially oriented housing operator that really looks to operate affordable housing that cultivates belonging and community. So as I mentioned, we really were looking at how can we foster relationships, and that was a huge part to garner project support and funding. And there was a broad agreement that the housing designed for social connection is a much needed community asset across Vancouver. And so actually 47%, nearly half of our building is flexible common space that can be used for residents, which is a lot. This includes a dining room hall, a living room. We have a guest suite for out-of-town guests. We have a large common kitchen and a reflection room. We have a garden. And then among that, we also have our units. We have 2 accessible studios, 16 studios, 6 1-bedroom units, and 2 2-bedroom units. Now I just want to share a little bit more and reflect on some of our values as a society. So thinking about this building design, for us, stewardship and community social connection was a core piece of this. In our value statement, we state that we give thoughtful care to our buildings, our spaces, and each other, really honoring the fragility and resilience of one another and our environment. And so this one simple line really expresses so much. Our building includes this diversity of spaces that I've started to talk about. We have other spaces like a library, a reflection room, a patio, and then even down in the parkade, we have blended spaces like storage rooms and lockers. We kind of have like a construction area room where you can work on projects. And then, as I mentioned, we have the community shared garden spaces. We also have public spaces like the little concrete patio right on the corner of the sidewalk at Victoria and First. And we're currently working on a mural activation in our alley. And of course, most importantly, we have the very personal spaces of all the individual suites that are filled with the different people who make this a community. And, the one another in our value statement includes residents, staff, guests, board members, and the public who visit and interact with our building. So when we break it down, there's lots of different spaces that we have to steward here. There's the green spaces, the living spaces, the admin spaces, and yeah. So we think about what is a good approach to stewardship when it comes to this, and at a leadership level. Stewardship is acting with the understanding that leadership is a temporary role which is outlasted by the lifespan of our organization. We perform stewardship whenever we actively prepare for the organization's future vitality. So this is investing in our people, our facilities, our finances, and making appropriate upgrades. And then at the group level, it includes ensuring that members within the organization interact well together. So this may look like providing nonviolent communication training for residents, or thinking about different types of programming that really continues to support that community cohesion. And then, at the individual level, stewardship focuses on promoting well-being for each other within an organization. And what we've started to notice over the time is how people began to care about these spaces. Sometimes they do so in an opinionated way, but they also have interest in the way the shared spaces are set up, maintained, and managed. They take ownership and pride in the environment they live in, and they notice when things are missing, broken, or messy. Each spring, our residents come together and we work on putting the garden in. So the staff and residents invest in a crop, but we don't know, if it will pay off in months to come. But it is a really beautiful act to see everybody out there. And then there's also this final piece around stewarding one another. Our residents are checking in on one another, they're cooking meals, and there's just the common, hi, how are you doing exchange in some of these common spaces. So these spaces were really built for people to interact, to have tea together in the afternoon, to host their friends and family for birthday parties. And so it's been a really lovely space for those communities to flourish. But one of the things that we've noticed is there are also challenges and opportunities that come to stewarding so much space, 47% of our building. We started to think about how often are these spaces being used, in what ways are they being used or underused, and how do we ensure that we continue to activate them for community well-being and social connection? And most importantly, is it financially sustainable for us to keep these spaces only open to residents in the building? Or should we think about our wider network, our neighbors? So we're at this crossroads right now where we're wanting to think about opening up these spaces as a community center, bringing in organizations and like-minded individuals to come together and to kind of build relationships with our current residents. Although we understand that is challenging. Those residents, this is their home, this is their living room, their larger kitchen. And so we're kind of at this piece of figuring out this challenge. And I think this is one thing for you all to consider when you're designing. So I'm just about to wrap up here, but I just wanted to say some of the big pieces that were really helpful for our organization was really creating and committing to a clear vision. So we knew that we wanted to be able to build and create for social connection and community. So we knew that from the beginning, and that really allowed us to identify who we would partner with and how we could get funding. So this allowed us to connect with organizations on similar projects that were already doing this. There's folks out there like Happy Cities and Hey Neighbor Collective that are really thinking about the design of buildings. And then finally, if any of you all are from the church space, we really wanted to make sure that we had clear roles and responsibilities. So the church, Cohere Foundation, and Salisbury, we had to work together to really define our roles, our responsibilities, and understand where the decision making would lie. So I would say that's definitely a core piece of how you can move forward. So yeah, we challenge you to consider thinking about how you can build for community connection, social resilience, and happiness in your next development project.
So Aubrey was sharing a little bit about some of their goals, some of the solutions that they brought, some of the innovations around co-housing, some of the challenges. I'm wondering, for each of you, as you're listening to this story and to this, hearing about this housing development, what are some things that resonated with you or stood out to you when you were listening to Aubrey speaking?
I'm curious more of the spaces that you have currently set up for like that social sustainability that you're looking at opening up to the public. I'm sure you noted this in the beginning, but just to, again, for us that missed the very beginning of it, what are these spaces and like what does that look like if somebody's living there, like a kitchen, outdoor kitchen, indoor spaces, community, that, and then opening it up. That's what my question.
It's a great question. As far as like how do we open it up, we're just kind of like we're just starting to approach that question. So our kitchen was designed to be a commercial kitchen. So we want to first get that certified by BCH. And that is one of the big pieces that we're thinking about. But we really want to consider, okay, how do we engage with our residents in this process? Does this mean hiring a community coordinator who is a resident to help support this process? We would want to have some conversations with them. Maybe they know of folks who would want to like rent out these spaces. When I think about the kitchen, it is a closed off section, or closed off room, and so it could potentially be rented out for small caterers, or maybe some just like startup organizations that are kind of like trying to get off the ground. Even one of our residents works in this space, and so thinking about maybe she can connect us with her communities. So the other spaces would potentially be, we have 3 different small rooms that are, one's currently like a reflection room, another is an office. And so we're thinking like, what would it be like to turn one of these into kind of like an art residency studio space, where we partner with neighbors and we do kind of like a seasonal residency, and then they get to also like share their artwork with the community. So we want to be creative, but we also want to engage with the residents and see what they want and how it would make them feel they want to feel safe. So thinking about those different protocols we need to have in place, but also things that they want and like are already a part of. It's exciting, but it's also it's kind of a new path we're walking. I think one thing that I've heard from folks reflect on is, would it have been better to have like just this entire first floor, like our whole first floor is these common spaces? Would it have been better to just have that kind of closed off and made it more of like a community center? But the building wasn't built that way. And so that might be something to consider, like looking at different options of those designs, and come by for a tour if you're local, so that you can see what's working for us and stay in contact. Yeah.
So question I got, I sit on a nonprofit society in a Custom Area Youth Network. We're a small board. We have a piece of property that used to house, right across from the high school, used to house a youth network, a youth recreation center. It had a bowling alley. It had pizza place. It was a place for the students from school to come over to learn. And it also had some housing above it. It burned down in 2005. And so we got this big lot. And what happened, it actually back in the days, it had a little gas pump on it. And so then we ran into environmental issues, and we're still struggling with that. But we are a nonprofit society, a small little group, and we're trying to bring it back to life and we're trying to, so I was trying to figure out this, maybe this co-here housing affordability would be an option for us to work with, with our society with co-here housing, but we don't have no funding, and it's really hard struggling finding the funding. We have the lot, it's free and clear title, but and we were off. Also, we were given from the elementary school across the street a portable, which is a fairly large unit, and we want to build a basement, and we want to do housing also, something for the whole community to be involved. Part of it would be to help finance would be on this lot to still have a youth center, green space and things like this, but also how do we, I've gone onto the BC Builds housing site, and it's really hard for a nonprofit society to get this off the ground. I guess we need help. We reach out, but they say you have to belong to a different kind of society, and it gets very, very confusing. So I guess we're reaching out. How can we need some help. Be the biggest question. Thanks.
Yeah, well, it sounds like your heart is in the right place. And it sounds like you have some land that you guys can tend to, and that's the first start, right? Also, I know there's lots of experts in the room, so I'm happy to connect with you further and find ways that maybe we can share our story and support you and offer suggestions. But yeah, I mean, I'm kind of new and I don't know, maybe excited about all of this housing. So I feel like there are ways to do it. It definitely takes a lot of work. And I think given that you have youth involved, that's huge. Like I would make sure those youth are part of that board of directors. There's a lot of I don't know, one of my favorite organizations, Environmental Youth Alliance. It's like there's, the board members are the youth. So making sure they're part of that decision making. But yeah, I think there's lots of lessons to learn. I have a case study that I can show you on how we started, and it kind of goes through, Renewable Cities put it together for us, but I'll share that link here soon. And it just talks about what we did. I think the huge piece for us was that we had the land, and then we were able to build these partnerships. And we had a dedicated group of volunteers that were wanting to work on it, but that can lead to burnout. So I think maybe this is where partnering with Vancity and seeing if they have any kind of support to help put together that business plan and start to scope out the work. There might be some grant funding available.
Are there other, I'm wondering if we think about other pieces that Aubrey was sharing, are there other things that are coming to mind? Or maybe I'm wondering if the story that she shared has helped you think about important considerations or potential next steps for your organization. What other things stood out to you in this conversation so far?
Well, perhaps I'll go. I think there's a few of us involved today we're from small communities, and the rural experience is very different from the urban experience. It's much, much harder, for one thing, to get the funding. So just to answer your very first question, what resonated, certainly paying attention to the importance of creating spaces for social connections. I do believe that's important in any build, actually. Can be very, very hard to get the funding, though, to support, that extra space. With BC Housing, they don't fund that. CMHC, with their new cooperative funding program, they do allow that. It's difficult, though. Our costs per square footage, for building something that you build in your city environments, it's considerably higher for us in rural and remote communities. But I do have a suggestion. I don't know if you're a member of the BC Nonprofit Housing Association, but I would encourage you to get in touch with them, because I think what you need to do is make some connections with smaller nonprofit housing societies, in your region. I'm familiar with, I think you said you're from the Cusp. but that would be a really great first step, because that's what we're finding, to find, like, for us, it's the Gulf Islands region of the province, to find, other groups who are in a similar situation, because otherwise it's a very lonely, frustrating experience, and people do burn out, boards do burn themselves out, just trying to achieve what seems to be what is very difficult, and in some cases it seems impossible. So, and that's my suggestion too for forums such as this, is just to recognize that that the rural, there's such a difference between the rural and the urban realities, and maybe a breakout space, for those of us who are from the small communities would be, and likewise for those of you who are from the larger urban centers, that would be really helpful. And it's almost always missing, that rural perspective, just the acknowledgement that it's very, very difficult and different. That's some feedback from us.
Yeah, definitely that theme of feeling lonely is really common amongst folks. It's like everyone's just trying to do this. It's just like, who do I talk to? So that's again why we wanted to make this more of a conversation format. And I'm really actively encouraging you to just be bold and reach out to each other. And certainly the rural piece, absolutely. It's such a, and the geographical spread across BC. There's so many different factors and perspectives and realities that you're living in whichever community you're in. Other thoughts? What else hasn't been spoken about here that you're like, this part's missing from the conversation so far, or just other questions that you're coming with?
I'm happy to go again, just quickly. The whole affordability question, in today's environment of really high costs for everything, that is a challenge. It will remain a challenge, I think, for some time. And it seems to me that there is a bit of a disconnect between what funders are willing to do and what groups can actually achieve, in terms of attaining affordable rents, for the people we're trying to support. So I'll just throw that into the mix. I don't think any of us has an easy, ready answer right now, but it sure needs to be on the table for discussion, because we're all asked to make things, and we want to make things. I like the word attainable that I've heard a couple of people use. That's what we all want to do. It's very difficult to achieve, and cover all the financial costs associated with both on the construction and the operating end.
Asked about community engagement and opposition received during the process. Aubrey, I'm not sure if you want to speak to that just briefly. We have maybe one more minute and you'll probably get whisked away, but I want to see if you can answer that one.
Yeah, I recall that there was quite a bit of community opposition in the beginning of this project. Lots of people were concerned about, an affordable housing building coming into in their neighborhood. And they hosted lots of engagement sessions where they really tried to share this kind of unique vision of an apartment building. And, towards the end, we've built really good relationships with neighbors. We haven't received any complaints from them. And so I do know it was quite a hurdle. And I think one thing, just reflecting on, just hearing from Taryn, is just like, start small, start having maybe just pop-up dinners, get to know the community, understand what those needs are. I know, Darren, like there's a lot of healing and repair that needs to happen in Lytton after all of the wildfires. And I just want to, share my kind of grief for what the community has experienced there. And yeah, I would say it really just is that relationship building, and make sure you're clear on that vision of what you want to develop. And I think that's something that Salisbury continued to stick to, which has shined through.
Thanks, Aubrey.
All right, so we'll dive right into the storytelling portion of our presentation for today. So from March 1st to 3rd, 2018, the city of Rossland got pounded with 3 straight powder days. Over 3 days, 60 centimeters of snow walloped nearby Red Mountain to the delight of skiers. On the morning of Saturday, March the 3rd, while skiers flocked to the slopes, City of Rossland CFO Elma Hamming arrived at Rossland City Hall bright and early to get a head start on finalizing the city's financial statements. On that fine morning, allocation of expenses wasn't the only overhead Elma was concerned about, because before she knew it, the roof overhead began to collapse due to the heavy snow load. Luckily, Elma got out of the building faster than an accountant can say, "We can't afford that," and she was unharmed. What followed is an inspiring lesson about the importance of strategic forethought, intersectoral partnership, and when life gives you lemons in the form of an unexpected avalanche during the middle of an audit, how to make an affordable housing snow fort. While the roof collapse in early March 2018 was the tipping point for Rossland Yards project, the starting point was actually much earlier. It was a cold, dark Thursday in 1897, and Ross Thompson, the founder of Rossland, was tired.
Hold on, Mike, hold on. It wasn't that early.
Right. It was actually a warm, sunny Thursday in 2005. The opportunity arose for the city to purchase a former highway works yard, which was a flat area covering a full city block located just 3 blocks from downtown and close to other civic facilities, such as the arena, our schools, and Ferrero's, home of the most amazing homemade Italian sandwiches that you've ever tasted. So that was 2005, and in 2006, a deal was struck to purchase this land, which kicked off a neighborhood planning process to generate ideas for the site, including housing, parkland, and a new city hall. For the 10 years that followed, these ideas were temporarily shelved as the city grappled with economic and operational challenges. When things did begin to turn around in 2015, developing this site became a council strategic priority. And from 2016 to 2018, the site, which was classified as a brownfield, underwent some pretty significant environmental study and basic remediation. In 2017, the land was subdivided into 2 parcels, with the eastern half designated as parkland for a skate park, and with plans to create a mixed-use housing start on the other half of the land if and when budget became available. And so in order to advance this project, there was a unique partnership between the city and a local nonprofit society called the Lower Columbia Affordable Housing Society, or LCAHS. We teamed up and prepared an expression of interest for a mixed-use building comprised of affordable housing units and a ground floor office and commercial space, which would hopefully ultimately serve as a city hall. And the city committed at that point the use of the land, and then we're willing to offer up a 60-year lease to the nonprofit, the Community Housing Society, who would be the operator for the units. Still didn't have the cash to do so. So in early 2018, there was an expression of interest submission to the BC Housing Columbia Basin Trust issued a call for interest on investments in affordable housing. So that was early 2018. Shortly thereafter, the aforementioned avalanche triggered the need for a new space for City Hall. So you may not know this, but generally using tax dollars for building a standalone City Hall is about as popular as a city councilor who gets in the way of pickleball lobbyists, which is to say it's a pretty tough sell. So as staff and council got to working on planning for the new City Hall, they determined that the new building could serve, avalanche, collapsed roof, need for a new City Hall. When we're involved in the planning here, determined that the new building, a new City Hall, could serve as a literal foundation for addressing both our civic needs for operations and for tackling affordable housing in the process. So a lot of research and dialogue with partners, and a solution emerged. Historically, Rossland's been a relatively affordable place to live when compared to other resort towns or other parts of the province. However, some of our recent significant growth in and around the ski hill has brought challenges to our social and economic fabric, which has resulted in rising housing prices and particularly pushing local workers out of our city. So the folks that are serving us in the tourism and hospitality sectors were no longer available or able to afford where they lived. So building on this partnership with the Housing Society, an alliance quickly emerged, and we pursued what is now called the Rossland Yards project, which was a 4-story building on this old railway site that would use like a new city hall on the main level or the ground level, and then 37 affordable workforce housing units on floors 2 to 4. So to finance the project, which had a total price tag of just over $16 million, the city was able to commit about $3.6 million from sources including like an insurance claim from where there was the collapse of the roof, as well as some internal reserves that had been built up over time. The housing portion of the project was able to leverage support from both the Columbia Basin Trust and BC Housing and a few other smaller partners. And again, it was structured in a way that the city would offer up a 60-year lease for the airspace on the land. And another thing the city was able to do was serve as a guarantor on certain aspects of loans associated with the project. And these are both ways we could demonstrate commitment and ensure the project's longevity. So when shovels hit the ground just about 4 years ago, we encountered no shortage of challenges along the way. Any project that kicks off with an avalanche, generally you're going to expect a few things to occur along the way. So Rossland's a historical mining town, and that comes with considerable, let's say, surprises when anytime we're putting a shovel in the ground on a major project. So in navigating the geotech mystery around this project, early on we identified that the site, which was at an old railway yard, was the soil, quite a lot of contamination with coal clinker. And within the first few months of construction, we quickly ate up about $400,000 in additional remediation costs to truck that soil off site, which more or less wiped out the entirety of the project's contingency budget right out of the gate. From a financial perspective, the city's portion was relatively well covered off, but for the Housing Society side, one of the big challenges and lessons that we learned was just around the cash flow management associated with a project of this scale, which was the biggest one that the Housing Society had ever taken on. Just the timing of submission of paperwork, waiting for approvals, and then waiting for cash to flow, particularly during COVID and a period with rapidly changing and generally rising interest rates. That was a challenge for the society and changed some of the economics associated with the project from the Housing Society side. So it was super important for them to keep in close contact with the city and with other funders, really encouraging they did a great job by encouraging the city and funders to be joining them on a quest to get this project done in the most efficient way possible along the way. From a rural municipality perspective, access to contractors definitely created some cascading complexity in this project when there's only 2 kind of painting companies within a couple hundred kilometers of town. Having everything dialed from a contracting perspective proved super challenging, and in some instances, like the one-off loss of an electrical contractor resulted in multiple months of lost productivity because we weren't able to put the envelope over the building to meet demands required for winter construction. And from a design perspective, ran into some challenges as well in terms of a design being carried out in Vancouver where snow conditions are slightly lower than in Rossland, which is known for getting pretty big dumps of powder. So some challenges along the way there. What we learned through the project is that in our case, it absolutely took a village. We estimate that there were about 10,000 hours of volunteer time from kind of cradle to completion of this project, put in largely by our affordable housing partners. So something in the context of that $5.8 million, 5.8 million units being constructed, multiply that by the number of volunteer hours and horsepower required, and it becomes quite daunting. So something to kind of factor in. Having a great community partner is absolutely crucial. On our end, again, back to that point around it being a tough sell to build municipal infrastructure, this was a great opportunity for both the city and the society to tackle their joint needs. And on our end, it was just super important to present a holistic business case of like what the pros and cons of this project would be. In particular, communicating some of the future property tax cash flows that would result from this project that otherwise wouldn't have existed. Another piece was by emphasizing green elements and a really green build, we were able to access a considerable amount of additional funding through FCM and Fortis to carry out a more efficient design of the building. So when carrying out these projects, green approach definitely makes it more economically viable, certainly over the long term, and can pull in quite a bit of additional funding. And ultimately, yeah, it's the story of basically nothing being so powerful as an idea whose time has come. This is a project that was seeded close to 20 years ago and took about 15 years to get off the ground, but ultimately came to fruition when we took advantage of a little avalanche that came our way.
Two quick questions. One, what forms of sort of modern methods of construction offsite prefab construction options did you guys look at, if any, especially because of the timeframes and the challenges around winter construction?
Thanks. So just on the response to the question, the on-site fabrication, off-site fabrication stuff, it was a stick build. We really don't have a lot of opportunity to kind of do off-site, any type of off-site construction. What we did do is because of the economic climate and supply shortages, and FCM came late to the game to give us some money for the net zero ready stuff. So we were able to kind of pre-order all of our windows and everything and do an upgrade on that. That was a change order, obviously, from the original scope of the project. And then lumber prices was the other concern that we had. So we basically bulk purchased like our lumber pre-design, and that was kind of a part of our tender contract was that it's owner supplied lumber. Those are kind of the bigger activities that we had in regards to offsite stuff. But from a prefab perspective, it was pretty much a design like a stick build on site, and obviously starting sooner than later in regards to the construction period. We wanted to make sure we got a foundation and the digging done prior to the snow period to kind of have that envelope up for 1 year of snow and then be able to build everything for the second year of snow. And again, that time period kind of was ebb and flow based on the supply chain issues for all of our consultants, our materials and our supplies and our subcontractors, and being a remote area.
Great, thanks for answering that. One last question here. As an emerging developer / builder, can you give advice on raising capital?
Like on the partnership side, just crucial to find a partner who has a well-defined project scope that you're going to be able to stand behind when seeking grant funding. So from the city's perspective, like looking to make sure that the project fits well. If you're partnering with the municipality, does it fit within their OCP or their official community plan? Is it related to a priority that's outlined in the council's current strategic plan? The more alignment you can get with pre-existing strat direction, the more weight you're going to get behind it. And then from an external granting perspective, the more clout that you have in terms of showing alignment.
So I'm seeing some good questions here in the chat. So I'll read them out, and then Mike and Brian, you feel free to give it an answer, and we can also give everyone else an opportunity to share their thoughts. How are you managing the relationship with the nonprofit? Are there governance issues that have arisen?
Yeah, actually, our nonprofit's been awesome. I think the key to the ongoing relationship that we have with them was that we basically set up a project management committee at least a year before we actually went to tender on this thing to do the design, to get that kind of design. And then we had project management oversight committee, which is the same people on the project management committee while we had the project going. So when any issues and concerns were raised about that, we could kind of deal with them on the fly. And as that relationship kind of helped out that kind of, we were in the same process of, it took us a couple of years to get lease agreements in play, but all those lease agreements are based on the ideas and the concept and the knowledge and the issues that arose from all those project management committee meetings, even in the design process. So that ongoing collaboration was very, very key, I think, in my mind. And then that project management oversight committee, we had our project developer, we had our architect, we had people from BC Housing, we had a few council people, and we had our staff that was kind of dealing with the operational side of stuff from an administration perspective, and we had the Lower Columbia Affordable Housing Society, which all were partners in making this project great, because we had to make sure that everyone was coming along on the same ride.
Yeah. But one thing that worked out really well there, like everyone was pretty vulnerable about their risks and concerns around the project. One of them being that essentially at the end of the day, if the project or if the society were to fold, like we are left holding the bag. And so when talking about governance and succession, it's allowed us to unearth like some of those issues early on and work directly with the society. And I think another one was just our ability to, from a governance perspective, just share each other's capacity. So on a fair amount of the admin side of the work, we were able to step up and help out. And then we learned a ton about housing in the process, and ultimately, I think that's led to just like a stronger approach kind of going forward for the region, where the just having that context for our council and our staff super important. And this project's allowed for the capacity for the society to now play a bigger game in terms of the region, with like having a significant asset that they can work off of.
And with the last 2 minutes, I just wanted to give one last question, and then Mike and Brian, feel free to wrap up any of your thoughts or share some last reflections. Is the residential component of the project fully self-funded, i.e. no operational subsidies, even if not at capacity? What does that include? And does that include amounts for long-term repair and replacement for the apartments?
Yeah, so that was actually one of the very, very key conversations that we had with our council in regards to the fine line between what the city should be responsible for, what the city is not responsible for in regards to housing, as it's not a core component of any kind of city operational activity that I would like to see as part of the city. With that being said, our pro formas on that particular project, we spent a lot of time and effort running the numbers from operational maintenance and capital. There's a minimal capital requirement that the local nonprofit has to put aside to fix building in the future. We do that as well, asset management stuff. From the operational perspective, we really wanted to make sure that the cash flow and the net positive activities were good. There is zero subsidy from the city on that project, except for the fact that we did a progressive 5-year permissive tax exemption on a sliding scale based on the policies that we have in place with that council was agreeable to help get a strong financial footing of the project at the beginning, knowing that in the future they're paying for all their capital, all their operational general capital requirements based on whatever it is that is in the future. And there'll be taxes coming to the city to help kind of fund other activities. And that was very much a key component from our council to make sure that that there was zero or very, very minimal subsidy from the city perspective. Yeah.
When I sort of semi-retired from the healthcare system proper, I started to embark on some innovation type of projects, and that led me to meet a very inspiring individual who happened to be a veteran who was significantly wounded in Afghanistan. And we were trying to work with some innovation and technologies to help to support him in his recovery. And the Legion, actually the Surrey Legion and the BC Yukon of the entire province Legion had fundraised using poppy funds to help to build some of the technology and fund the technology to help him in his recovery. During that conversation that I had with the Legion, growing up in a small town where the Legion was located in the center of most communities across BC, if not all of Canada, I asked the question, how are Legions going to survive? The membership is dwindling with the aging veterans. The buildings are starting to look a little bit old and weathered. $2 beers and meat draws might not be really engaging communities in the same way in the future. What is the future of Legions? At the same time, having a little bit of my public health and health system background, recognized that there are some really significant needs in our communities, from a health system that we're just not able to meet all the needs of those in the health system that need support, but also in communities that need housing, that need services, that need more of an integrated approach. And that's very difficult for large health systems to be able to tackle. And so the concept became, what if the Legion was to take its asset, which was its land at that time, in the heart of, the Wally, which was in the center of North Surrey, and contribute it in a way that we could build a vision that was focused on how do we help veterans, how do we help also first responders who are so traumatized by their work, and bring together some sort of beacon of hope for them in the future, including housing. And that's how this vision started. What we did then was we went out to the community and we held community forums. And we invited everyone and anyone who would touch the lives of a veteran and their family throughout their journey. And we listened to what was emotional and compelling stories around how the system was broken for those veterans when they returned from service, and that first responder community was starting to experience something similar. And once we heard that, we continued to have that dialogue with clinicians, with community leaders, with political leaders and others, and said, what's stopping us from creating a vision to use assets such as Legions in the heart of their communities to build something that would disrupt the current status and create opportunity and vision for the future. And so that consultation secured and solidified that collective goal. And then we continued to have that dialogue, and I'm leading into the community dialogue and the importance of it here. We continue to have that dialogue around what should it have, what shouldn't it have, what's missing, where are the gaps, what can we do, what's too difficult to do, who's missing in these conversations. We wanted every single voice. And our commitment then to those that gave their voice was, we are going to collect that voice. We're going to secure it then in this vision, and we're going to publish that vision, and that will become our mantra towards that end. And this was important because it also helped, one, to be inspiring and encouraging all of those there, that we can do this collectively, hundreds and hundreds of voices. We can create a movement. We can generate the enthusiasm and excitement. We can talk to our political leaders and understand what would be the barriers to this. Why couldn't we do this? And it helped us to understand where those barriers lied, so that we could spend some time in understanding how do we overcome those barriers. It was to reach out to the larger community and those that could assist in this. And as a result of that, we committed to publishing it, because when you publish it and you've got everyone's engagement and names on that, then it really galvanizes and solidifies that this is a vision that we're all prepared to put our names, ourselves, our roles behind to achieve. And so that really did become the foundation. And we, over the following 8 years, worked with many stakeholders, explored, number of opportunities. Some worked and some did not. But we remained so unrelenting and committed, everyone, and the vision that was crafted on those days with those veterans and first responders and their families that shared their hearts with us. We said, you've defined this, and so we are committed to doing this for you. And that carried us through the difficult moments and the challenges. And we worked for 8 years straight to deliver that project. And what was unusual was all stakeholders, we held meetings every Monday morning at 10 o'clock, and almost everyone, unless they were out of the country, participated in those for 8 years. My Monday mornings looked different from there on. But it was so inspiring each time to be reminded. And every time that there was an influence or a barrier that you thought, okay, this isn't possible, we're not going to be able to pull this off, et cetera, we went right back to it and said, no, we have to do this, we have to find a way. And so it was inspiring, it was engaging, it was almost like a marketing tactic, but at the same time, it brought those out of the woodwork that felt like this was something that was really meaningful, and it gave them a place to come and engage. And I think that spirit is what carried us through all of those years to its fruition. And ultimately, not only is it a building, and we talked about that, initially we reached out to the development community and we said, this is what we're trying to achieve, but this isn't just bricks and mortar. It's what happens within this facility that is going to change lives. This is what matters. And it was very, very important to ensure that we selected a development partner that was going to have the confidence and the creative, purpose-built vision within themselves to say, okay, we're willing to listen. So in other words, we're not going to just come in and we're not just going to build a building and it's going to look like this or it's going to look like that, because they're specialists in building buildings, but that they would be, and I don't want to use the word servant to the vision, but in some ways they sort of were. And I think, that's a very important part of this. It introduces risk to a developer, so they're not always all that comfortable. But I found that having a couple of us as leaders through the entire journey from beginning to full execution of the vision was really important to keep those two polar sides always meeting in the middle, always meeting and always engaging in a way that we're going to do this. And this is going to be special for the people. It's going to touch for decades and decades, if not centuries ahead. So that was the importance. And I feel it is the cornerstone of these developments. I think that there are multiple amenities and land assets. We have a vision in the sense that we have a purpose as to why we need to create housing and who we need to create housing for. And I would present and argue that those forums are extremely important, again, to galvanize that vision. Everyone understands what we're doing. People can identify what their role would be in it. We identify early on the pitfalls so that we can strategically identify how we overcome those. It just has so much value. But for me also, going out publicly and stating very proudly and boldly that you are going to change the lives of individuals through this mission is, I think, extremely important, and then be held to that. It's got a transparency to it. And that also helps to outlive political cycles, because you will have leaders at different levels of government that will come and they will go, but your vision has to be, so cemented in that foundation that it remains unwavering. And as a result, to be able to see the lives that it changes is extraordinary. And I just hope to see so much more of it. And I think now's an opportunity, because we have so much purpose and we have so many amenities and assets that we can use to really make some significant changes in our communities. So again, I go back to being absolutely thrilled, particularly that there's so many smaller communities here, coming from a small community. I know that we can do this. I've seen it. And I wish we could do more of it. And hence why I love to share this story, hoping that it encourages others to dive in and do it. And we did build this with the intent that we would share this over and over and over again, hoping that it inspired other projects that were similar but different. But know it can be done, as difficult and as daunting as it seems in the beginning. It is possible. It just really needs that commitment, the storytelling, the engagement, and ultimately, the fortitude to see it through to its fruition. So, but I'll stop there in case there's questions or comments.
Thanks, Rowena, for the overview of the project. I was involved in one of the stakeholder meetings 100 years ago. So it's really, it was with a different organization, and it's really cool now driving past, because I find I feel a little part of ownership in that. Yeah, which is lovely. I work in the homelessness serving sector more so. I mean, veterans are part of that, but kind of not my key focus. And as I'm sure is no surprise to anybody, when there's housing that's going up, with my population, there's often pushback from the community. I'm wondering if you had any pushback from any specific groups, or was everybody, just because of the clientele that you were serving, was everybody just fully on board?
I think with every project, as you rightly know, there's always some questions around it. Originally, while the vision was veterans, we expanded it to the first responder community, and there was a little bit of a rub there that we had to work through. So that was one. The second, I would say, is where the Surrey Legion was located was at that time the location of what was Surrey's tent city. And so we were very concerned that the community would see that as, a gentrification, that we were disrupting that community, to build some grand fancy building. It was fascinating that spending time, one, with the community to say, this is actually what we're building. And it was interesting that, even the community that we were disrupting were supportive of that vision. They thought, oh, that's a really good thing to be doing. So that was helpful by going out to the community and having, those conversations. At the same time, we were also quite fortunate. Again, I think this project went through 3 different mayors in Surrey. It started out with Mayor Watts, and then it transitioned to Mayor Hepner, who happened to have a father who was a veteran, and so became very engaged. And I don't know how much this project fed into one of her priorities, which was to provide some alternative housing for that community that were tenting. And so there was some modular housing, which was minimal, but a market improvement to help to support that. So it actually attracted other supports from the community, again, in trying to support that. So I think that those were really important. And the other thing I'll mention is, it was such an important project for the city at that time, that the political leaders also assigned it as a nexus project. And so at that time, the nexus project, the mayor at the time identified, I think, 3, for her political cycle. This was one of them, and that allowed for us to have a number of our processes expedited. So in other words, instead of having to go to roads and having to go to recreation and having to go to all the different departments, of which then start to take on a linear form, and then it's 5 years before you get started. they brought all the teams in. So when we had a conversation around Legion Veterans Village, there was a an aggregate department from the city that was there to accelerate and expedite some of those processes to get us rolling. So I mean, we had a lot of support, but we had challenges. But I guess I go back to that original comment around being really transparent, getting out there, like just completely opening your chest to what we are doing here so that everyone can identify and voice their concerns. Then we've got time to sit down with those groups and say, okay, well, what would be solutions that would, in almost every conversation, how do we achieve a win-win here? How does the community that we're disrupting win? How does this become a reality and support that community? How do those that are in leadership roles, how does this, how does this become a win for them as well? So that was really important, I think. And I think it continues to be important in every one of these projects, so you don't encounter something that actually takes your project off the rails. Thanks for the question.
Thank you.
On the ceded territory of the Notley and Stellarton territories, and we're in Fraser Lake, northern BC. We're in a small town of just under, it's definitely under 1,000. Our sawmill just shut down, so we don't have anything for people to work here for. Big industries have all shut down now. We work quite a bit with our Legion here in Fraser Lake. It's always on the verge of shutting down, but we're working hard to keep it open. I'm a little about me is I'm carried. I am on the fire department. I wear many hats, and I operate the Fraser Lake Senior Housing Society. I'm new at it, never done it before, never operated a building before. I'm just in the works. We have a 23 apartment, 1-story building at the present time. Housing is definitely needed in Fraser Lake for seniors. I have quite a list for people waiting to get in, but there's quite a few that haven't signed up because they're going to the neighboring towns of Vanderhoof. They're quite a bit bigger than us and have already 3 to 4 senior housing already. And they're looking to build more there. So we would like to build one. It's always been wanted to happen in Fraser Lake, but we're a volunteer board. And nobody's had the commitment or the time to do it. And I just seen a need, so I ended up getting on the board, and I ended up being president. So it kind of snowballed in the past year and a half to where I'm looking for funding to make a building. Communication has been key. Small town, it can be, for some of you in small town, it can be difficult because people have a lot of ideas, but nobody wants to step up to the plate. Sometimes what do I do now? That's always my question. What do I do? Or what's my next step? Or I have lots of experience with seniors and dementia, disabilities, stuff like that. And I've always wanted, if my parents were still alive, that's what I want to make, is something that I would make for my parents. And we've made a lot of changes to our building that we have now. It's always been a volunteer board, so it's been a lot of work for me in the past year and a half to get it updated, right down from administration all the way up to maintenance on the building. So it's a very old building. Electrical is probably my biggest challenge right now. And getting the support from the community is not a challenge because everybody's in support of it, but it's like it's been talked about for so long that, yeah, like it's really going to happen. So there's a lot of doubt, but I'm hoping to prove him wrong, but I'm here to learn. That's my story.
Firstly, it's very sad to hear about the mill. I at one point was a chief operating officer with Northern Health, so I know Fraser Lake very, very well, and I applaud your passion and your heart being, looking for opportunities. It would feel like to me that type of a community engagement consultation might be really important because there's such a big change going on in the community to be able to really identify, okay, what is possible here and what is not? Where are your key stakeholders, including Northern Health, because you're looking at individuals that want to age still in the community, as well as the community itself and how does it rebuild and go forward. But also having homes for people who have worked there their entire lives and want to stay there and want to retire there. And it feels like that type of an engagement process would be really important. And then you also get to identify who has resources and who has thoughts and ideas, and how do you start to pursue each of those avenues to make it a reality. As you mentioned, it's really tough. You've got assets, you've got an opportunity, you have a vision, but it's bringing it all in, galvanizing it into a path, a direction, and you got to just go out there and you got to run with it and figure out what's going to work and what's not, again, with that unwavering tenacity to say this has to happen for this community. Including some of the private sector stakeholders that, they might have pulled up and gone, but, there's the potential for, what's to come of those assets that remain. And is there something there that can be considered? So I'm happy if you want to email me to give you any encouragement around some of the tools that we have used in the past, if it supports you in trying to figure out where you take it as far as the next step. It's really tough when you are wearing so many hats and feel that the burden and the responsibility of doing all that. That's why sometimes it's nice to get in and sort of distribute some of that. And there are many times I said in those rooms, I might be here just facilitating this, but this is everybody's responsibility in order for it to be delivered. You have to sort of take some of that burden off your shoulders a little bit and get everyone to come in, and it will be that collective spirit that helps to get it across the line at the end of the day.
Okay. Yeah, and there's a lot of synergy. Alicia and I are becoming the tag team, and it's we maybe should have reversed the order because the Vancity Community Foundation's the earlier in, and BC Builds is the next in. But just you'll hear from her in just a moment about how our two programs fit together, and they really do fit together very well. So I'm just going to take 10 minutes and happy to answer questions. Some of you will have seen this presentation before, and this will be new to some folks. So just a little bit about BC Builds. The program was launched in February and really designed to intervene in two spaces in two ways. The first is the high construction cost, high interest rate, difficulty, high land costs, so basically the high cost of construction, period. That's one space where BC Builds is designed to intervene, and I'll talk about how in a moment. And then really, BC Builds starts where the rest of BC Housing's programs leave off, and it's a new intervention in a middle income housing space. And I'll define middle income in a moment. So it doesn't replace any of BC Housing's programs. It's an addition at the other end of the housing spectrum. BC Builds works in three ways. Our first job is to work with all of you, community, nonprofit, government, First Nations landowners, to identify low-cost land for development. So land that can be put into projects at $0. We don't ask anyone to give up their land. I think the Rossland Yards breakout room, which I was in, they did a 60-year lease with the proponent for the housing portion. That's great, a 60 to 99-year lease. So we identify low-cost land. We work to to bring together landowners, developers, and speed up project timelines. We really have a mandate to deliver housing quickly because we are, of course, in a housing crisis. And then not only do we do the land identification work and some of the convening work to get projects going, but we also are able to provide low interest financing and grants. So how BC Builds works for you, of course, depends on who you are. So we have 3 kind of target audiences that BC Builds works with. The first are renters. So we will probably in the future be developing an affordable home ownership program or pathways to home ownership program. But for now, we're starting with renters. Our aim is to work with landowners, governments, and others to have thousands of units, thousands of homes under construction between 2024 and 2027, welcoming first residents in 2026. We can work with nonprofits, First Nations, co-ops, municipal housing corporations, private developers. We're kind of agnostic as to who the owner and operator of the buildings are. However, there's a strong incentive for us to work with nonprofits, First Nations, and co-ops, municipal housing corporations, because in those instances to those parties, we can provide grants. And I'll talk about that in the next slide. But when we provide a grant, we require that even though BC Builds is not an affordable housing program, it's a market supply program, but we provide grants so that 20% of units are 20% below market when the building opens. And then I'll talk in the next slide about how that affordability in relation to market improves over time. Who we mean by middle income are these folks over here, people in our communities like teachers, nurses, transit operators, construction workers, small business owners. So people who actually make a half-decent salary but just can't find anything to rent because there isn't appropriate housing for them and their families, or them and their roommates. That came up in Rossland, and I'll talk about that maybe more in the Q&A, that BC Builds, they're just market rental buildings. You can have a 2-bedroom and roommates could rent it out. So we don't have the same restrictions as the other BC housing programs. And just really to be clear here, these maximum incomes that you see are not the target for our programs. They are the maximum. So this is anyone over this kind of household income wouldn't qualify for a studio or 1-bed. Anyone over this household income wouldn't qualify for a 2-bedroom or larger, but these are not the target household incomes that we're aiming for. We're aiming as low as possible. And that's why you bring the land, we bring the financing, we expedite development, and try and shave off construction costs to make the homes attainable to people who are making middle incomes. What we do with government, nonprofit, community landowners, we help to unlock underutilized land and develop a vision, project goals, and timelines. And as we heard in the Rossland session, and as people probably heard in other sessions, project goals and timelines are really, really important. Get everyone on the same page at the beginning, and then we're all working towards the same thing. We look for creative opportunities to add housing on existing sites and incorporate housing above new infrastructure. Again, public land is very, very valuable and very, very scarce. And so if we can do housing plus, that's what we want to do. We also help to secure developer, builder, and owner operator. And the list of some of the who that we work with are there. This is not an exhaustive list. It's just a sample. And then finally, the flip side of the last slide, we work with nonprofit, First Nations, and private developers and housing operators. One of the key services we provide is connections to available zoned land, and I'll talk about that in a moment. It's a really exciting and very low threshold way to test the market, if you will, to see, does your land have possibility for building housing? We work with the proponents to help accelerate proposals and work with municipal staff and councils to move projects through quickly. The who is here. The grants are listed here. Really, and I don't have time in a 10-minute presentation to get into this in detail, but on the BC Builds website, we have the BC Nonprofit Housing Association did a great webinar. We recorded it. It's there. If you want a deep dive on how the grants work, I'd encourage you to watch that webinar and the Q&A. But in a nutshell, we can provide grants of up to $225,000 per unit to bring down 20% of units to 20% below market. The idea is not to maximize in the early days, people were asking, how can I get $225,000 per unit? That is not the question to ask. The question to ask is, what is the cost to my project if we drop 20% of rents to 20% below market? What is the equity gap that's created? How much money do we need to drop those units? And then you divide that amount of money by all of the units in the building, not just the 20% of units at 20% below market. And that's what your grant is. So our job is to spread the money as far across the province as we can to as many projects, not to maximize the per unit grant amount. So really, BC Builds is market when it starts, 20% of units at 20% below market. But because these grants are going to nonprofits, co-ops, First Nations, generally entities with a mandate to deliver low-cost housing over time, as the mortgages are paid off, the savings go back into lowering the rents so that 10, 20, 30 years down the road, BC Builds buildings that are built now really become the affordable housing of the future. And just to give you an example, the best one I can think of that, we all talk about, people think about Vancouver, it's so expensive. If you live in a co-op in Vancouver, it's really inexpensive, it's affordable. When those Vancouver co-ops were opened in the 70s and 80s, they were at market rents for working people. And now, only all these years later, because of the mandate of co-ops, that's truly affordable housing. So that's one of the things I love best about our program. It's market-based with some below market units now, but over time, it becomes the deeply affordable housing of the future. All right, in 2 minutes or less, I'm actually going to skip through these initial BC Builds projects. I will send these slides to the Renewable Cities folks, and they can send them out to all of you. So you'll get to see these projects, but I want to just take a few moments to talk about actually, if anyone who's heard this presentation, you wouldn't believe that I'm skipping this slide because it's my favorite one. This is just how we work differently than the conventional construction process. But I want to get on to the Housing Development Opportunities page. This is a new service. We just launched this at the end of April, and it's where we take zoned land on your behalf, put it up on this page on the BC Builds platform, and invite proposals for your project, for your land from the development community. You specify, do you want a private developer or nonprofit developer? Do you want just a developer builder and you've already got a nonprofit partner? Or do you want a developer builder owner operator? We hold info sessions for the sites once they're posted to share, you and us, BC Builds together, share with the development community, answer questions about the opportunity. You create, using a template that we provide, a property opportunity notice where you tell the development community all about your property. This is just the front page. It's an opportunity to do a pitch. I noticed that Elkford is here, I think. Elkford did a fantastic job pitching their property to the development community, and we've received some proposals and we'll be evaluating them. So this is really your storytelling opportunity. And then once you tell us how long you want to leave it up on the website, and then the opportunity closes, we get proposals in. And again, I'm not going to walk through this detailed slide here. You'll get it when you get the package. This is also on our website. But the key point I do want to make is that when the proposals come in, and this again goes back to the Rossland story, BC Builds and the landowner co-evaluate the proposals. We look at them together based on very strict evaluation criteria because it's a procurement process essentially, so it has to be fair and transparent. But we've been through one evaluation process already with a municipality, and it's just incredible to have our expertise in real estate and financing and lending and construction and the local expertise of the landowner who knows their community. And anyways, the evaluation process happens, we choose a successful proponent, and then going back to that rocket ship slide that I skipped, we work very quickly together, BC Builds, the landowner, the proponent, to get projects from, okay, you're selected as successful, and we really are pushing to be in the ground in construction between 12 and 18 months later, depending on the complexity of the project. So I'll leave it there. I know I went a minute over, but I'm happy to answer any questions when it's time for that. Thanks, everyone.
So Alicia Medina is from Vancity Community Foundation, and she is going to present. She's the manager of the Housing Accelerator Program at Vancity Community Foundation. So she's going to present a little bit about their program, give you some more information, and then we'll have a conversation about that. Looks great. Thank you.
Okay, great. So hello, everyone, and thanks, Leanne, for the presentation. As Lisa mentioned, our programs are very complementary, so oftentimes we work with organizations really early on and then get them ready to go to BC Builds after we work with them. I feel like we don't have to talk much about the housing crisis. We all know that, you know, at least 21% of people in Canada pay more than 30% of their household income in rent. And those that are facing the greatest challenges are vulnerable and equity-deserving groups such as single mothers, newcomers, refugees, Black, Indigenous, and youth-led households. So we all know that we have a housing crisis, and the premise of our program is that we think the solution to this is to build more community-owned housing. And the mission of our program is to preserve and grow the supply of community-owned, affordable, climate-ready homes. And we do this through three main areas of work. The first one is we offer early stage project funding for community housing providers to catalyze development. And we do this through grants and loans, which then allows organizations to unlock other sources of funding from BC Housing, CMHC, and conventional financing. We also offer organizational capacity grants to help strengthen the development ability of organizations. And in addition to those grants, we offer a workshop series called Brooklyn for Impact, where we guide organizations through the process of creating a real estate vision and strategy that aligns with the organization's mandate and strategic priorities. The third area of work, we have grants for sector capacity. So working more at removing sectorial barriers hindering the community-owned affordable housing sector. And these may include projects around research, policy, as well as supporting education and sector events. And all of this is made possible through impact capital that we deploy every year. Every year we deploy about $1 million in grant funding that is made available to our program through the Vancity Credit Union. And we also have a $25 million revolving fund that is composed of Vancity Credit Union contributions, CMHC, as well as individual impact investors. So the program was created to address common challenges faced by projects at the really early stages, as you can see on this graphic, when the risk for the project is higher and resources of funding are more limited. And as projects move towards the pre-development and construction, there's greater opportunity to secure funding from other major funders such as BC Housing and CMHC. Our fund, in comparison to other organizations, is quite small, but we think it's quite effective in catalyzing access to greater sources of funding. Through our project grants, we aim to support organizations at these early stages, and we offer three tiers of granting, which I'll expand more in the next few slides. So we have first vision and concept grant, then we move on to a feasibility study, and then finally a business planning grant that it's meant to get projects ready to then really advance into the pre-development stages and permitting and whatnot. Once projects progress beyond these initial stages and the viability of the projects is confirmed, we have our loan products that offer the opportunity for organizations to have that cash flow to continue advancing their projects. And we have three main loan products: pre-development loan that supports soft costs like rezoning, working drawings, and the development permit process prior to construction. We have a pre-construction equity loan that contributes to ongoing construction expenses and project equity up to 10 years post-occupancy. And finally, we have acquisition loans that assist organizations in acquiring land or turnkey units in existing multi-unit residential buildings. So I want to just take a minute to talk about the project development process as it relates to our program tools and products. So the development process can span a period of 2 to 5 years, or even longer, depending on the complexity of the project and the capacity of the organization. And these stages are not always linear, or they sometimes happen in tandem. And as you can see, our program, our grants and loans align with the different stages of a development process. The first tier of grant, I'll just expand a little bit more on the types of support that we offer for early stage projects. So it's the vision and concept grant. And we think it's important to establish a vision that is in alignment with the organization's strategic priorities. So not just looking at your site. And we offer grants for up to $15,000, and the stage of a project usually takes between 1 to 3 months, again, depending on the level of readiness of the organization and the complexity of the project. The primary goal at this stage is to, as I mentioned, develop a clear vision and establish guiding principles that then will guide the rest of your work as the development advances. And this involves identifying the organization's motivations for development, ensuring alignment with strategic priorities, also assessing the organization capacity, including staff, board capacity, expertise in affordable housing development, and also if there is a gap in that capacity, seeking for external consultants or ways to bring that onto the project team. And then finally, understanding the site's development potential, looking at what kind of control you have over your land. Do you own it through a mortgage or a land lease? At this point, organizations might perform site surveys, look at municipal requirements, like a high level viability of the site without getting too deep into the feasibility study. And at this stage, while it's not necessary to hire architects, hiring a development consultant or bringing an external development partner might be helpful in facilitating this stage of a project. And on this screen, you'll see some of the outcomes that we often see organizations produce through this stage of granting. So I think the main point here is to have a project vision that it's documented and clear and that your board has approved. So to make sure that everyone's on board with the development that you're pursuing. The next stage of granting is a feasibility study grant, and the scope of work might take between 3 to 6 months, and we offer grants up to $30,000 to support this work. And this is when you start diving deeper into the site viability, and you might start looking more into the financial analysis. And at this point, I think it's when a project might be engaging a development consultant more fully, as well as an architect, to explore what's possible to build on the site. So in comparison to the previous grant, once you have that vision and concept that's aligned with your organization's mission, it's really looking at what additional capacity you might need to deliver on the project, and also more fully, as I mentioned, getting into your site feasibility study. And again, these are some of the potential outcomes that you might see from this work. So preliminary design produced by an architect, a classic cost estimate, funding and financial analysis, and a funding strategy. So understanding whether your project will be targeting BC Housing, CHF program, or BC Builds, or CMHC, like starting to explore how you're going to bring some funds to your project, as well as an option analysis for the delivery. Like, you don't always have to become a developer, owner, operator. I think a lot of organizations feel like that's the only option to do this, but there's like multiple options. You can partner with a nonprofit developer or a for-profit developer entity, depending on what the mission of the project might be. And then the final tier of our grants is the business planning grant, and this process can take up to 12 months from our experience working with different organizations. And we offer grants up to $15,000 to support this work. And this is the last step when you decide whether there's a go or no go on your project. We recommend at this stage that organizations advance the financial analysis of the project, also advance conversations with the municipalities to ensure that the zoning and municipal approvals is aligned with the project that you're proposing, as well as really advancing those conversations with potential funders. And as you can see, the outcomes and the deliverables of this stage start to grow, because really it's meant to be a very comprehensive plan with all the required documentation to ensure that you have a viable project before you move ahead and spend more money. So our main point, and Lisa always tries to say that they want to get fast into the ground, like 12 months and 18 months. Our approach is like, we want to help you get ready so that when you get to BC Housing and BC Builds, you can move fast. So in our perspective, it just takes time to set these foundational pieces, and we highly recommend that you take that time to ensure that you have capacity and that you have a viable project. Yeah, and I just like to show these slides. So the point here is that as we work to address these housing crisis and build new homes, it's vital to take these necessary steps to ensure that you have a successful project delivery. And we're here to support those initial stages through our grants and loans as well. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Alicia, for sharing that presentation. Lots of information, lots of really valuable information. I know there's lots on both sets of slides. We'll certainly be sharing those slides with everyone after the workshop, so don't panic. I mentioned Slido, so I see a few of you have entered in a couple of questions on the Slido link. So hopefully you can access it okay. You click on the link, you just enter in those 7 digits, and then it will just show the Q&A that where some folks have already written some questions that they're hoping that Lisa and Alicia can answer. So I'm going to just start with the top question that's on there right now, and while folks are thinking about what questions they might have and entering them in there. But we'll start with the one that's at the top. So it says, how are you keeping the cost of builds low cost to allow for affordable housing? So I don't know, maybe if we start with Lisa, and then Alicia, if you want to add any response to that, if that's okay for you both.
Sure, yeah, I can start. So it's just to kind of to refresh, BC Builds isn't building affordable housing right now. We're building rental housing for middle income people. That becomes affordable over time. Having said that, the cost of construction is something that we're really, really working to bring down. And so we do it in a number of ways. First is when we're partnering with nonprofits, co-ops, First Nations, we make those grants. And those are the first thing that are spent on a project that go directly towards the construction. So with BC Builds, there's no ongoing operating subsidy. Those grants are used right at the beginning to help bring down the cost of construction. So that's number one. Number two, and I didn't get into this in my presentation, we offer low-cost construction financing. So if you go to a bank to borrow for your construction, you pay a certain interest rate. If you come through BC Builds, you pay something that's a little bit like, I think right now about 2% or 200 basis points less than what you pay at a bank. So that's a cost savings for construction. And then the other big one, and I feel like we're all kind of starting to get our heads around this, is simply getting to construction sooner. So if you take 3 to 5 years to get a project to construction from the time you start to the time you start building, costs just go up. And so if we can take a project from, we've been to Alicia's program, we've got our vision, we're ready to go. And then 1 year later, we're actually in construction, that's a construction cost savings. So those are the 3 main ways. The fourth way, and someone asked a question about this in the Rossland section, and this is something we're going to, I think, move towards more, both as a program, as an industry, is having construction happen off-site. So mass timber, panelization, modular, there's all sorts of ways that we can build homes kind of more like we build cars. Right now, it's kind of it's not cost competitive. It's a time savings, which is a cost savings. But I feel like if I could look ahead and predict the future over the next 10 years, we're going to see really an exponential growth in off-site manufacturing of housing, which will start to bring down costs. But for now, it's those first 3 with an eye to off-site construction in the future.
Great. Thanks, Lisa. Alicia, do you want to add in some comments about the affordability side from Vancity Community Foundation's perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the question was about keeping construction costs low. I don't have too much to add other than what Lisa said. I think there is only so much work that we can do as a funder. I think our goal as well is to accelerate projects and get them to construction faster. And that's the best way to save money, because construction costs don't really go down. They keep on going up. So the longer a project takes to get to that stage, the higher construction costs would be. And our funding program is really meant to help accelerate projects and also to provide sufficient cash flow during the pre-development stages so that projects don't have to stop and go as much as they're getting approvals from different funders. So I think our perspective is to just ensure that continuous cash flow so that projects can advance faster as well.
Great. And I'm going to pop in this question because you're on screen. Is the foundation funding for urban areas only?
Yes, currently to this date, our program region is Metro Vancouver, as well as the south end of Vancouver Island up to Nanaimo. We are currently working to expand and to increase our capital so that we can work in other regions in British Columbia and potentially across Canada. But that is to come in the next coming years. But at this moment, it's mostly just Metro Vancouver and south of Vancouver Island. That being said, reach out if it's a very compelling project. Then sometimes we can partner with a local credit union that might want to invest a bit of money with us on a project. We can always explore opportunities. So if you're outside of our region, don't hesitate to reach out, and we're happy to always connect and see what we can do.
Thanks, Alicia. Okay, I think the next one's for Lisa here. How would you incorporate seniors housing into a BC Builds project, or is this not possible? Could a certain number of units be set aside for seniors housing?
It's a great question. So the key premise for BC Builds is that there's no ongoing operating subsidy, and the rents need to cover the cost of operating the building and servicing the mortgage. So I guess I'll answer the question in two ways. Middle income seniors who have a pension and are able to pay, market or close to market rents. We could, that's great. That's fine. We could say, 20% of units or 30% of units need to be set aside for, we wouldn't, but the housing owner would say right of first refusal to residents who are 55 or older. That's totally fine. If we're talking about low income seniors or lower income seniors, BC Builds does not have any prohibition about stacking funding with anyone else. So we can stack our grants and our financing with anybody else's money. So if there's another partner who would come in to subsidize the seniors housing or bring equity at the beginning to buy down the cost of construction specifically for seniors homes that are not seniors homes, but seniors housing that's substantially below market, that's totally fine. So we can work creatively, but the thrust of our program is not low income or even moderate income housing. It's that the rents that people pay, because and this is what differentiates it from the rest of the BC housing programs, which is why the rest of the BC housing programs are so important. Every other BC housing program has an ongoing operating subsidy, which is what helps to keep rents low. BC Builds does not, because that's not the way the program is designed. And so there's no subsidy. But so yes, seniors who are middle income seniors, retired teachers, nurses, et cetera, who have a pension, no problem. And we can stack creatively if the question is about incorporating, lower or low to moderate income seniors housing. But that cash needs to come from somewhere else.
Great, thanks. There's another question that came in on the Zoom chat. Would you consider a project that is a combination of rental and ownership? And I think, I don't know, Alicia, if that one applies to the foundation as well, but.
Yeah, we would definitely, as long as it meets our affordability criteria, which it's in alignment with what CMHC, because most projects would seek for funding or take out financing from CMHC or BC Housing. So we've provided grants and loans to projects that are proposing innovative, affordable homeownership models. It's definitely something we would look at.
Great.
Yeah, and right now we don't have authorization to lend money for affordable home ownership. We will hopefully in the future be developing what I like to think of as a pathways to home ownership program, so we can look at multiple options that come forward. But right now, the financing that we have available is just for rental housing to start.
Thanks. All right, there's another question here. What is the length of time required for a mortgage under the BC Builds program? I understand BC Housing program requires a 60-year mortgage. BC Housing and BC Builds. There's not, BC Housing doesn't require a 60-year mortgage. BC Housing requires a 35-year mortgage, but I believe a 60-year operating agreement that's tied to the lease. I could be wrong about some of that, but I know for sure that the mortgage is 35 years. And BC Builds, same thing. If you come through BC Builds and get your financing through us, it's a 35-year amortization. And the requirement is to keep 20% of units at 20% below market for that 35-year period. If we have signed almost signed an agreement with the federal government. It was announced, but we're still working on the details, that we can kind of fast track or direct projects through BC Builds to CMHC, to the Apartment Construction Loan Program.
In that instance, it is a 50-year mortgage, up to a 50-year mortgage. If I kind of get from the impression from the question that they'd like a shorter mortgage. So CMHC, can get up to a 50-year mortgage with lower interest rates than we can offer at BC Builds. And then in that instance, 70% of units need to be at market and 30% of units need to be at 30% below, but it's the longer mortgage that makes the more below market units work. But if that person has a more specific question, you can email me and I'll put my email in the chat.
Great, thank you. Okay, lots of these seem for the BC Build side of things. Okay, what type of PDF, and maybe you can clarify what a PDF is, does BC Builds provide? And is it interest bearing? And how do we access it? Through a normal BC housing application?
So PDF is project development funding. It's an interest-bearing loan, and honestly, like if you're in the Vancity region, or even if you're not, a better place to start for it depends on where your project is. But for early project development funding, Vancity's grants to get started, and then Vancity actually has a project development funding loan once you've gone through all of their, anyways, I don't know why I'm speaking for Alicia, but their interest rates are 2% flat rate, and ours are quite, probably around 4.5 or 5. So we can provide project development funding, but we don't do it as early on as Vancity does. And you don't just submit an application through BC Housing. You can contact us at info@bcbuildshomes.ca. We'll have a conversation about the project. We don't want to lend money that's risky because it's not good for us and it's not good for you. So we really want to kind of, I would characterize BC Builds as it's a relationship-based program where we start to understand your project, your relationships you have with your partners, and we really want, for your sake and our sake, want to make sure that we're not putting project development funding as a loan in too early. But yeah, it is available for sure. But yeah.
Thanks, Lisa. And Alicia, do you want anything to add there?
Yes, just to reiterate that our funding program is for that early stage risky period of a project, so we can provide grants when there's like an idea and a site available, and then we can provide some initial support to advance those early stages. And then later on, our low cost loans are 2% simple interest, flexible terms, and you don't have to pay anything until the term of the loan, which is upon the first draw of construction financing. So it offers a really good option for folks to just be able to advance their projects and then go knock on Lisa's door.
Great. Thanks, Alicia. There's a question here, one of the latest questions that came in, and Lisa, you were talking about this relationship-based focus that BC Builds has. There's a question here about, can you speak to the requirements or criteria for from a nonprofit operator, co-op, or First Nations Development Corporation to apply to be a partner?
I'm sorry. I wonder if that means on the Housing Development Opportunities site. So I'll answer the question in both ways. So I'll start with the Housing Development Opportunity site because I think that's the thrust of the question. So first of all, if you're interested in the housing development opportunities, as new opportunities are posted on that page, and Alistair, who's here from our team, can put this into the chat, you can sign up to be notified whenever a new property is listed. So please do that. And then if you're a nonprofit, First Nation or co-op interested in putting forward a proposal to the Housing Development Opportunities, a site that's listed there, next key thing is make sure you come to the info session. We always host it within 2 weeks of the site being put on the platform. And then, and just like today's workshop, those info sessions can be a really good opportunity. So say you're a nonprofit, you show up and the room is full of private developers. This is pending to happen. Room is full of private developers that want to build the housing, but they don't know any nonprofits who want to operate. And so come to that session, put your contact info in the chat and say, hey, we're interested in this opportunity. If any developers want to partner, please contact us. So that's I think that answers the question. But if you, yeah, maybe ask again if you want to know how you apply to BC Builds if you've got your own housing project. But I interpreted the question as to how to participate in the Housing Development Opportunities site. And I can tell you for sure that there's a real need for nonprofits to come forward in those kinds of partnerships, and the development community doesn't always know how to find them.
Thanks. Question here, I think this can relate for both of you, because it's talking about the resources that are required by proponents. So it is talking about BC Housing, but I think, Alicia, also in your experience with working with groups that are trying to develop housing, how many resources are required by proponents? So knowing that BC Housing staff are supporting, or knowing that if they're supporting, that they're very busy and often lean on development consultants. What does that look like in your experience so far?
Let's start with Alicia, because they really provide access to those resources through their grants, and then I can go after that.
I guess I just want to clarify the question, like the questions around resources in terms of capacity, like human resources. Or...
It sounds to me like it's a capacity question, because it's about but I guess it could. Yeah, let's go with that.
With that. I mean, I think it's more like I think our grant support to assess that for each group is different. If you are an organization and you have a piece of land, but you're not a housing operator and you've never undertaken affordable housing development, even if you might have a really competent team that is dealing with the current operations of your organization, and maybe on your board, you might have some real estate expertise, and those are good pieces, but being really clear and honest about what capacity you need and what gaps you have. I think like the knowing what you don't know phrase really comes to mind. And then looking at ways to bring that capacity into your project while assessing the different options for the delivery of the project. So whether it's a development consultant, or you can partner with another development entity, whether it's a for-profit or nonprofit, or partner with an experienced affordable housing organization that maybe has their own development team. So there are different options, but I think it starts with really looking at what your organization has and what it's missing, and then figuring out how to bring that capacity into your team. And I guess the last piece that I would say, also financial capacity, right? Because you might have land that has no mortgage, and you can definitely leverage that as part of your project, but advancing a project into construction requires capital, and even with all the grants and different opportunities that different organizations provide, oftentimes it's not enough. So ensuring that you have some capital to bring to the table, it's always helpful as well.
Yeah, and I'll just add, there are, I guess, two approaches. One is coming to see BC Builds, and we are set up with some development expertise. We've got senior development managers. We've got these really great folks called senior technical officers, and they can do some preliminary massing and architectural studies on your site. So we can provide some of that, like it's, I guess, in-kind support. But the other, going back to the Housing Development Opportunities page, I think that we built that page, that platform, in response to hearing from the municipal sector, nonprofit, landowning sector, that you may have, or churches and others, you may have land for housing, but you don't have the capacity to unlock that land. And so the Housing Development Opportunities page does require that your land is zoned. So that a lot of the upzoning the province is doing, I think, is really going to help. So that's that it's zoned for what you want to build. If it's not, don't worry, we can have a conversation. But once the land is zoned, you don't need to do much more than put it up on that site, kind of know generally who you want to serve, or do you want a 4-story building or a 10-story building, and then the proposals come in, and it's kind of brilliant, because the applicants that are submitting their proposals, they do the work. They'll draw up how could this, like they invest their own resources because they want to be successful at winning the proposal. And then once they're at the table, you've kind of, it's like a development consultant, but they're really invested in the project because they're there as your delivery partner. So if you have land that's zoned, getting it up on the Housing Development Opportunities page is a really good first step. If the land isn't zoned, then we can have a conversation about what that takes and working with the local government just to set the table for the zoning, not worrying about the development permit and the building design and even the project pro forma. That'll come in competitively through those who submit proposals through the Housing Development Opportunities page. I'll leave it there. Thanks, Leanne. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer.
No, great way to end us off. And thank you, Lisa. Thank you, Alicia. Thanks so much for sharing a lot of information. I hope that it's helpful to our group today to give you a sense and help you think about what's next and answers any questions that you might have. Amal shared this roadmap. This is a little bit of like, where are you right now in the process? How do I make sense of where I am? Where does Vancity fit in? Where does BC Builds fit in? This was shared already, so I'm not going to go through it, but just so you know, it's a resource that we've shared with you. You can take a look at it and think about where you're at and where you might be going. In September, we have a workshop. It's going to be in person. So I know for many of you that just won't be in the cards, but we do have an in-person workshop where we're going to be talking about these next steps with Vancity Community Foundation about crafting a vision for your land. So stay tuned. We're going to see what we can do in an online format because I hear you, many of you are in rural areas. It's just not going to be possible to come to Vancouver for that. I want to give a huge shout out of thanks to Lisa, to Alicia, to each of the hosts that were sharing their storytelling about the housing developments that you've been part of, and just all of you for showing up with the conversation and engaging thoughtfully and with curiosity. And thanks also to our facilitators for facilitating the group discussion and conversation. So I think that's it. I hope I have not forgotten anything. And thank you so much for joining us today.